We're on the lookout for sponsors to join us on our incredible journey with Inspired Change with Gunter. If your organisation cares deeply about meaningful conversations around masculinity, self-development and mental health, we'd love to partner with you. Our podcast has a wonderful, dedicated audience committed to personal growth and positive social change. By sponsoring Inspired Change with Gunter, your brand will connect with listeners who truly value thoughtful discussion and support initiatives that promote real transformation. We're incredibly proud to be ranked number 1 in Australia and number 5 in the USA on FeedSpot's top men's mental health podcasts. For more information on how to become a sponsor, please reach out to Miranda Spiegner Sapon, our showrunner and executive producer. We'd love to explore how we can work together to inspire change. Now, thank you for your continued support, and let's keep inspiring change together.
You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. That's me, I'm your host. So before we move on, I want you to note that the views expressed in this podcast are my own. This episode is intended for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional, psychological, or clinical advice. If any material raises personal concerns, please speak with a qualified mental health professional. Having said that, let me get started. And I want to sort of tell you about how this particular episode kicked off. I was looking through our new second edition book, Making Good Men Great, Surfing a New Masculinity, and there was a particular section in it about dads. And I remember a song by a guy called Harry Chapin called Cats in the Cradle. Now, Harry Chapin wrote it in 1974, and it's fundamentally about a dad who's too busy with his son throughout his son's childhood. Then the son grows up, the father retires, and the pattern simply flips. Now, I just want to point out that nobody chooses it. Nobody noticed it until it was done. So when I say flip, it went from the father being too busy for the son, now the son was too busy for the father. So for me, there is a difference between explaining an idea and arriving at it. The song didn't illustrate the argument. It was the argument given in a different form. Because it's not just Cats in the Cradle. There's a whole bunch of songs that have been doing this kind of psychological work for decades. Songs that found a language for experiences that resist ordinary language. Songs that told men something about grief or shame or endurance or love that they had never been able to say out loud, but recognized the moment they heard it. Now that recognition isn't trivial. When we encounter our own experience reflected back to us, particularly an experience we've been carrying silently, something loosens. The isolation of it breaks slightly. We realize we are not the only people who have felt this way because someone felt it clearly enough to write a song about it. Now, I could make a whole series about songs that made us. And I might just do that, but right now, let me stay with this episode. What does this song know about human beings? What does it understand about the parts of experience that are hardest to discuss directly? I'm going to use Cats in the Cradle as the song for this episode. So I want to start with something that I suspect you already know but may never have put into words. There is a difference between strength and endurance, a real difference, and the world tends to only celebrate one of them. Strength is visible. It looks decisive. It gets talked about. Endurance, on the other hand, often looks like nothing at all. It looks like someone is getting up and going to work after a night that they didn't sleep. A parent holding themselves together in front of their kids when they're quietly falling apart inside. A person who carries real disappointment year after year without ever asking anyone to notice. Over many years of sitting with people in a therapy room, I have met a lot of people whose lives would never make the news. They haven't done anything dramatic, but they have survived things that would have broken others. A childhood where love was conditional on performance. A marriage that gradually emptied of warmth. A redundancy at 55 that felt like being told your usefulness had expired. The death of someone who was supposed to outlive them. The shame of addiction. The particular loneliness of becoming invisible to the world. What I notice is that they almost never describe themselves as courageous. They say things like, I just kept going. There is something I find deeply moving in that sentence. Not a triumph in it, not heroism, just the plain fact of continuation. There is a song that actually illustrates that particularly well, and it's The Boxer by Simon and Garfunkel. Now, it was released in 1969, and it's still there. I don't think that's because of the melody, extraordinary as it is, or the production, which was genuinely, for the time, innovative. It's still here because it gives shape to something that a lot of people carry but can't quite name. That feeling of being knocked down by life repeatedly and still finding some reason to stand back up. Now, that is not a story about success. It's a story about dignity. And those two are very different things. To understand why the song lands the way it does, it helps to remember when it arrived. The 60s were ending and the optimism that had coloured the early part of that decade had started to fray. For the US and Australia, Vietnam had become a moral wound neither country could close. Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy had been assassinated. Student protests were spreading. The faith people had placed in institutions was beginning to crack. A whole generation was quietly asking, is this really the life we were promised? Now, a lot of music from that moment became overtly political. Dylan challenged power directly. Marvin Gaye asked whatever happened to compassion. Creedence Clearwater Revival went after class inequality in the Fortunate Son. Now, Paul Simon did something different. He turned the camera inward. Rather than asking what was wrong with the world, he asked what does it actually felt like to be a person trying to survive inside it. Now, that might sound like a smaller question, but I don't think it is. Social upheaval always finds a way into private lives. The large events of history become personal. Wars come home as fathers who can't sleep. Economic collapse becomes a marriage under impossible pressure. Cultural expectations about what a man should be getting absorbed by carried on for decades afterwards as something that feels a lot like shame. Now, that is where the boxer lives. Not in Parliament, not in the battlefield. It's about the inside of being a human being. So, in that context, let me talk about shame for a moment because it's the one thing this song is really about, even though it never uses the word. Shame is probably the most misunderstood emotion in psychology. People confuse it with guilt all the time. And the difference matters. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame, on the other hand, says, I am something wrong. Guilt is a specific action. It can be addressed. You can make amends, repair the relationship, you can move on. Shame is different. Shame attacks the whole self. It says there is something fundamentally defective about you, and no particular action will fix it. I've come to believe, after a long time working with men, that shame sits closer to the center of male suffering than we usually want to admit. That's not to say women don't experience shame deeply. They do. But the roots in are often different for men. Many boys grow up in environments where they absorb a very clear message. Love is conditional on competence. Be strong, be useful, don't bitch about shit, control yourself. Don't fail where anyone can see. Now, nobody has to say this directly. It is learned from the texture of your daily life. Think about the father who withholds praise as a matter of principle, a coach who treats vulnerability as a weakness to be punished, a classroom where showing you don't know something invites ridicule, a workplace where working yourself into the ground is branded as dedication. So what happens over time is that the voice doing the judging shifts. It stops coming from outside. It moves inward. And once it's inside, it's very hard to distinguish that from your own thinking. And that's the psychological legacy of shame. And it's the part why so many men keep going long after they've forgotten what they were actually originally fighting for. Now, here is what I think is one of the most important things about the song. It refuses the idea that healing means becoming invulnerable. We live in a culture that sells resilience as though it were a destination. Do enough work on yourself, read the right books, go to enough therapy, and eventually life will stop being hard. That is not what clinical experience shows, not remotely. What I've seen sitting with people over many years, decades, is something more complicated and more interesting than that. The people who do well are not the ones who stop suffering. They are the ones who can stay in honest relationship with themselves while they suffer, who don't dissociate from their experience or numb it or perform a version of themselves that is fine when they are not. That is a harder thing than toughness, and it is a different thing entirely. The boxer in the song keeps absorbing blows. What doesn't change is the world. What changes is something inside him, a refusal to let what happens to him define what he is worth. That's dignity. That is the word I keep coming back to. It's not a fashionable word. We tend to reach for resilience or strength or grit or courage, but dignity is more precise. It is not pride, it is not status. It has nothing to do with whether things have gone well for you. Dignity is the quiet conviction that your worth is not determined by whether life has treated you kindly. It is intrinsic. It belongs to you regardless. That is, I think, the deepest movement in this song. The boxer keeps standing not because he has an expectation that things will turn around, but because standing has become an expression of who he is, not what he's achieved. It is who he is. Now, that distinction is certainly worth sitting with. I want to name something else that tends to get misled in conversations about men and suffering. There are two stories our culture tells. One is that a man who struggles has failed at being a man. The other is that suffering in silence is the mark of a real man. Both are wrong, and both cause real damage. What the boxer describes is neither failure nor heroism. It is the ordinary, relentless work of remaining a person when life has handed you significant reasons not to. The work is not curdling into bitterness, not surrendering your sense of self to the punishments experience delivers. In psychological terms, what we're talking about is the capacity to maintain self-continuity under adversity, a coherent sense that underneath the difficulty, there is still someone there who persists, who endures, who does not disappear. This is what dignity looks like in practice. I want to come back to you now. If you've stayed with this episode to this point, something in it has probably touched something in your own experience. That's not an accident. Songs like The Boxer survive not because they describe someone else's life. They survive because they describe something in the person listening. So let me ask you to think just for a moment about your own version of this story. Not the version you might share at a dinner party. The real one. The one that has gaps in it, and losses, and moments you handled badly, and things you're still trying to work out. Think about a time when you just kept going, not because you felt strong, but because stopping wasn't an option. Think about what you carry quietly, the disappointments you haven't spoken aloud, the version of yourself you imagined you'd become and haven't, the grief that hasn't fully passed, the shame that turns up uninvited in the early hours of the morning. Now, this song is not asking you to admire the boxer, it's asking you to recognize him. And in recognizing him, perhaps to recognize yourself. There is genuine psychological value in that recognition. Not because naming something automatically heals it, but because when we see our own experience reflected back at us in art or music or the story of another person, we remember that we are not carrying this alone. And that reminder, quiet as it is, does something. It says this is part of being human. And it also says you have not failed. It says the fact that you are still here, still trying, still reaching for something worth reaching for is not nothing. So before you go, a few things I'd like to leave with you, to sit with, not a checklist, not a homework, just questions worth carrying. Where in your own life has endurance been invisible? Even to you. What does dignity actually mean in the way that you live day to day? not as an idea, but as something you either have or feel you've lost, or something you've managed to hold on to? And is there someone close to you, someone unremarkable by the world's standards, whose endurance you have never once acknowledged out aloud? If so, it might be worth saying something. This has been Inspire Change with Gunter, and a little episode referred to songs that made us. Now, if this episode meant something to you, share it with someone who might need it. And if you'd like to go deeper, come to our Patreon community, where there are some written reflection exercises that extends everything we've covered today. So thanks for listening. See you next time. And until then, stay inspired. You know, on this show, we talk a lot about living with purpose, slowing down, paying attention, and being intentional about the choices we make every day. Because when we simplify the noise around us, we can better hear what really matters. Empathy, connection, and showing up as the best version of ourselves. That's why I'm genuinely pleased to welcome our newest sponsor, Distill Union. Their philosophy aligns beautifully with what we do here. Distill Union creates slick, thoughtfully designed essentials, wallets, key organizers, phone cases, all built with a less is more approach. Their Wally wallets, Ferris key organizers, these are everyday tools that make life easier, cleaner, and calmer. In that simplicity, there's space for clarity. There's space for change. As a thank you to our Inspire Change community, they're offering 20% off any product with the promo code INSPIRECHANGE. Have a look, try them out, and see how simplifying your day can open the door to something deeper. Visit distillunion.com and enjoy 20% off any product with the promo code INSPIRECHANGE. That's distillunion.com with promo code INSPIRECHANGE to check out.
Hello to all our listeners. We thank you for tuning in and supporting positive social change, which makes you a part of Gunter's efforts in transforming not only men's lives, but lives in general. And we are grateful that you have joined us. We want to extend a huge thank you to our listeners in Pittsburgh, Drexel Hill, Johnstown, and Philadelphia for bringing Pennsylvania all the way to number 2 on the top 10 USA listeners list. And to our global listeners, we extend our gratitude to our listeners in Ryazan for bringing Russia to number 19 on our global listeners list. And a special shout out to Asuncion for bringing Paraguay and South America to number 18. Congratulations! You made it to the top listeners list. I, Devonna Prinzi, the co-executive producer, and our showrunner, Miranda Spigner-Sapone, sincerely thank you and ask that you please take the time to like, follow, subscribe, and share as your efforts make a difference to everyone here at Inspire Change with Gunter. If these stories resonate with you and you would like to engage more with Gunter and the Inspire Change team, please consider joining our Patreon community, where our members find bonus content and early access to video episodes. Membership awaits at patreon.com/Inspire Change. That's patreon.com/INSPIRECHANGE. As always, thank you to each and every one of our listeners. And most importantly, please keep inspiring positive social change.
Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.GunterSwoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com.